Scott Gamm is a correspondent with TheStreet TV. So, Scott, at this point, is Bitcoin a good investment for people?
Well, certainly if you've been in it, it has been a good investment.
Yeah.
Bitcoin prices were at $1,000 at the start of this year. Now they're nearing $12,000. So it's certainly an incredible run. And, you know, the chart of Bitcoin is starting to look parabolic, which always reminds you of the tech bubble in the late 1990s. And we saw how that ended.
Absolutely.
So it's certainly something to think about.
So meanwhile, the Winklevoss twins, made famous by Facebook, may be the first Bitcoin billionaires. And earlier this year, the SEC rejected the brothers' effort to create a Bitcoin ETF. You think this cryptocurrency will ever become legitimate in the finance world?
Well, obviously, it remains to be seen, but the ETF part is interesting because many exchanges like the NASDAQ and the CBOE, the CME out in Chicago, they have filed paperwork to create Bitcoin futures contracts where you would essentially trade on the price, not necessarily the underlying Bitcoin asset. And you could conceivably create an ETF off of the futures market for Bitcoin, so that's something to watch. But here's the thing. There's this whole debate over whether Bitcoin is a currency. And when we think of currencies in the traditional sense of the word, it has to be backed by a central bank, right? The Federal Reserve. So when we use dollars or euros in Europe, that's issued and backed by their central banks, the government banks. And obviously, Bitcoin is not. Now, it's interesting. We have had some Federal Reserve officials come out and say, hey, maybe the Fed should create their own cryptocurrency. It's, you know, a little bit premature, but maybe that's something that they should watch. And if that happens, I mean, think about it. Who would want Bitcoin when you could buy a cryptocurrency from the Fed?
That's actually backed up by something.
Exactly.
Right. Well, switching topics now to the broader economy. The Senate Banking Committee on Tuesday approved President Trump's pick for Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. His nomination now goes for the full Senate for confirmation. What is Wall Street expecting from Powell as Fed chief here? Is it sort of more of the same, status quo?
I think it's totally more of the same. You know, Powell is already a Fed insider. His views are similar to Yellen. I think he might have a little bit more of a friendly attitude towards banking regulation. That'll be good for banks. But, you know, when you think about the Fed, they're trying to maintain price stability and keep everyone employed, keep the job market going. And they've been having success on the job market front. Inflation has been weak. It's been at about 1.4%. The inflation target for the Fed is 2%. But look, low inflation is good for consumers. But when you look at the economy, we want to see a little bit of inflation because that's a sign that things are moving in the right direction.
So the Federal Reserve is largely expected to raise interest rates when it meets next week. Has the market priced that in?
I think so. There's about a 90% chance that the Fed is going to raise interest rates, at least when you look at how investors are pricing that probability in. The real question, though, for the Fed next week, because, of course, it will be one of Janet Yellen's last meetings as Fed chair. In fact, one of the second to last meeting is how many rate hikes will we get in 2018? The Fed is targeting 3 rate hikes. That could be a high hurdle to achieve, but we'll certainly see what the forecasts are from the Fed next week.
All right, Scott Gamm. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you.